requested. And again, I would just ask that when you leave the auditorium this evening, as the Boy Scouts say, leave no trace. Please make sure that you pick up after yourself, and the school is appreciative of that fact, and I'm sure so is the staff. Now, I do have a couple of folks that have signed up with regard to, I assume, the House of Worship law as it relates to the agenda. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on agenda items other than the House of Worship law? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Then name and address for the record, please. And I would just ask that you keep your comments this evening down to 3 minutes because of the number of people that are here. We'll have our planner keeping time, and he'll give you notice when there's 30 seconds left. So yes, Mr. Corbin, name and address for the record.
Corbin, 617 Avenue, Chestnut Ridge, New York.
Thank you.
Last Sunday's Journal News featured an article on coupon.
Excuse me, Mr. Corbin, this is just on the agenda, not public comment yet. This is just on the agenda items.
Oh, except the House of Worship. All right, so we'll wait.
Okay, thank you. All right, so then what we'll do is, I see that, Mr. Corbin, I see, but you had signed up with regard to the agenda item with regard to the law. Do you wish to speak on the law?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you wanted to speak about coupon, which obviously isn't on the agenda. If you want to speak about the House of Worship law, I apologize. Go right ahead.
No, I'm not speaking about the House of Worship law.
Oh, okay. All right. Then we'll get you at the end of the meeting. No problem. All right, Mr. Liegelson, I think you're next on the list. Please name and address for the record. On the House of Worship. This is only on the agenda. I presume now folks only want to speak on the proposed House of Worship law. You will have an opportunity to speak at the end of the meeting on any and all other matters, but right now this is only on the agenda, and I presume at this point it's only going to be on the House of Worship law. Again, please keep your comment to 3 minutes.
I wrote comments and rehearsed it for 5, but they'll probably be like 4.5 or 4.
Please, it's 15 seconds right now, Mr. Liegelson, that you can raise up.
It's always been 5, all right? Okay, Jerry Liegelson, 31 Midway Road. For the benefit of my fellow residents here tonight and for the board members as well, I will state some notable facts about what this proposed law will and will not do. I ask that the village's planning consultant correct me if anything I say is not correct. On parking, this law deals with 3 kinds of parking by people attending a place of worship or a residential gathering place. They are on-site, off-site, and on-street. They are mutually exclusive. In particular, off-site parking does not include parking on the street. For all the formulas and restrictions in this law about required parking spaces, how much must be on-site or off-site, this one fact remains. Parking on the street and on nearby blocks by people using a place of worship or a residential gathering place will not be restricted by this law, except where there are parking signs that prohibit it. The one exception is where for residential gatherings only, parking is only allowed on one side of the street within 750 feet if the gathering place opts to use some off-site parking. So to put this into concrete terms for everybody, the daily and nightly parking and street congestion that neighbors have been putting up with at Spring Hill Terrace and other informal places of worship will almost certainly continue, and potentially on both sides of the street. In case you didn't know that. On the next topic, neighborhood places of worship, or NPW. This is a specific classification in the law for homes up to 10,000 square feet, with or without residents who actually live there. And most importantly, they are able to have accessory facilities and functions, namely social halls for parties, engagement and wedding receptions, etc., classrooms, offices, gymnasiums, indoor recreation, bath and shower facilities. A neighborhood place of worship could reside in any of the residential zoning districts, for example, on lots as small as 0.574 acres.
Have another
or
30 seconds. You can
What?
continue. We'll give you another 2 minutes.
I am completing this.
All right.
I am almost soon
Okay.
done. This law allows an NPW to be the home right next door to you and have any of those activities that I mentioned every day and night of the week, in addition to clogging the streets with parking. That is why 640 residents strongly requested in their submitted letters, and the planning board of this village recommended to the Board of Trustees sitting before you that the NPW classification be omitted entirely from the law. But the Board of Trustees ignored that request by residents and moreover shut out the planning board from any formal review and comment on all the subsequent drafts of the law. Now, in closing, I have 3 simple and related questions to ask of the board regarding your vote tonight on the Places of Worship law. I have here draft 5, the version draft 5 of the proposed local law on public assembly uses dated January 16, 2019. It is 12 pages, and I downloaded it this afternoon from the village website. First question, is this very same version of the proposed law that you will be voting on, will this be the proposed version of the proposed law that you will be voting on this evening?
Yes.
Second question, will the exact text of this document be submitted without any changes to the Secretary of State and subsequently incorporated into existing village code should you adopt this law tonight?
Yes, with regard to the insertions, I'm not quite sure logistically how that actually occurs with regard to the Secretary of State, but that's correct.
And third, is it true that any subsequent change to this text can only occur after the March 19th election and after the 2 elected trustees are seated on the board?
Well, actually, theoretically, the law can change when a trustee or 2 trustees make a motion, and then second, that we revisit the law, and that there is a majority vote to modify or revisit the law. But there is a procedure in that we will go through the same thing in changing the law that we did in changing this law. We would have to have, it would have to be a GML review, it would have to go through the various county agencies, it would have to be sent to the neighboring towns and villages. It would be the exact same process that took place with regard to this House of Worship law on any change in House of Worship law.
So clearly, no change of any kind would take place before the March 19th.
I don't think time-wise it would be possible.
Right, okay. That's all.
Thank you. Ms. Dupree. And again, name and address for the record, and in fairness, I will give you your 5 minutes since it seems like we should be okay time-wise.
Good evening to the village and to the residents. I was looking at your draft, and of course I checked it based on the draft number 5. I just found out it was put up.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now? All right, sorry about that. I have certain questions. On your draft 5, it allows for classrooms, or does it allow for classrooms or schools? Because I know your neighborhood places of worship and your community places of worship allow for classrooms or religious schools, because it doesn't specify if it is for adults or for children. You just have to look it up. Neighborhood says something. I'm not too sure about exactly what it says. No, the neighborhood, the community says that they are going to allow for religious schools and or classrooms. Okay? It doesn't specify if it's for children or adults. Now, if you vote on this and you approve this, and it's now turning into children, that are going to be using these schools. I also want to remind some of you, maybe you don't know, that now if these are going to be approved as schools for children, East Ramapo Central School District now has to provide funding that's going to come out of the budget for the public schools. So now, not only are we affecting the residents of Chestnut Ridge with all of these laws, all these changes, we are also affecting, and I love to use this word, our neighbors which are beyond Chestnut Ridge, okay? We are going to be affecting at least 8,500 public school students. We already know the budget went down twice, okay? It is going to affect 85 plus public school students, okay? So please think about that, because a lot of us have been fighting for these kids to get an education. Also, where in your neighborhood places of worship, and also community places of worship, you say that no parking or loading shall be permitted, or there will be loading and delivery areas located in the rear. Exactly what is being loaded and delivered, I hope it's not turned into a business, because there's supposed to be no business. You see, you're not being specific as to what you're allowing to happen. Your community service, your community places of worship allows for the sale of religious articles. This is now turning into a business in a residential area, okay? I don't know if you guys actually read this, but there are a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of things that are going to affect not only us here, okay, but everybody else. And I don't know, Mayor, if you're quite understanding what I'm saying, because you're going like this.
I'm trying to see I need your prescription, sorry.
Oh, okay. You also have that, you don't want certain things to happen, like there has to have a certain number of people, and people that are not from the neighborhood are supposed to be doing certain things. Who's going to enforce that? You also have that services may be held between, no religious services or function will be held between the hours of 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. What about the people who have to work and they need to be able to get to sleep? 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. may not be enough time for these, because they may have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to work. So you're really giving them a window of maybe 3 to 4 hours to sleep. And we all know it is not enough sleep. Okay? Because I know that there was a holiday going on. It was during the summer or the fall. It was warm, and my window was open. It was 11:30 at night, and people were coming up and down the street, speaking very loudly and carrying on. Okay? I was not asleep at the time, but what if I was asleep? That would have waken me up. All right? Now also, I keep hearing neighbors, 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 and that really bothered me. Okay? Because one thing that I already knew, but it also cliched it for me when I went one of the services that I attended. Who is my neighbor? This question was asked over 2,000 years ago. Your neighbor is not just the one, thank you, is not just the person who lives in the street where you live. It's not just the person that you speak to that lives next to you, or that lives 2 streets down from you. Your neighbor is a person who needs your help, and that person could be half a world away. So maybe we ought to start looking at Mr. Rogers' neighborhood so that we can remind ourselves who our neighbors are. Because neighbors do not infringe on other neighbors' rights. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now I'll try to address some of those comments. I think you're confusing the type of schools that being alluded to that's being permitted in the house of worship as opposed to a regular school. Our village regulations say that if you're going to have a full-fledged school, such as would be something supported by the East Ramapo School District, you need to have 10 acres or more. The school that they talk about here is not dissimilar to the type of school that we approve with the Coptic Church, that we approve with the Fawcett Church, in that if they want to have religious classes, whether they be adult or children, they could have that. So I guess in my day they used to call it catechism. I don't know exactly with the different denominations, how it's termed, but that's basically what is being alluded to as far as the type of educational classes that they're talking about. This is not going to have any way, shape, or form get involved with the East Ramapo School District in that if you got 10 acres or more. And then that's a different story. That's state law. State law will determine whether you're a legitimate school or not, other than having the 10 acres. So that addresses your comment with regard to the schools. With regard to, you're talking about parking in the rear, and have a seat. With regard to the parking in the rear and so far as the selling of articles and things of that nature, that was actually a suggestion or a recommendation brought up by the Foster Church, because as you're aware, the Foster Church, the way their setup is right now, they have some, they have entrance, ingress and egress from the front. They try to keep their loading on the side and the back, which is what was approved with the planning board. So for consistency's sake, just like we required of the Foster Church, just as we're required from the Concord Church, we would require that from any houses of worship. We're not really differentiating. That parameter, that guideline with regard to loading, unloading, deliveries, sale of articles, that was actually brought to us by another denomination because, again, they may sell some type of religious articles and things of that nature, which they're permitted to do, and they have been doing. So it's not a business. That's something that churches and other houses of worship do on a regular basis. So there's nothing nefarious behind we can't really, only one conversation really. We really can't differentiate from what the other houses of worship and denominations are doing with regard to the law. So if you're entitled to sell, again, it's not a business. You're a house of worship. That's your business, for lack of a better description. But if you're going to sell religious articles, you're entitled to do that. With regard to the enforcement question, that has been a problem since before I was a mayor, before I was on the Board of Trustees. And we are trying to wrangle that one. And I have mentioned in the past, and I will remind folks again, that as we talk about a new budget, the way we're talking right now is the building department will be increased by one full-timer as far as the deputy building inspector is concerned. We're going to increase the code enforcement by have a full-time code enforcement and 2 part-time code enforcement. Our hope is that now, with those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slots within the building department, that will help us address the enforcement issue. I'm not going to try to deny that we've had some issues with enforcement. The hope is that with more personnel, at least personnel that are here full-time as opposed to part-time, that we will address the enforcement issues. And as far as the hours of worship are concerned, there too, there are other denominations in this village that worship on certain hours very early in the morning. And again, the hours that we came up with was not directly attributable to one particular religion. That was something that was required of us to look at, because there are other denominations that groups meet at 5:30 in the morning, and you may not even know it, but they do. And they ask us to make sure that we don't take that away from them, because they're going to worship early in the morning and then they're going to go to work. So that 12 to 6, you could address that?
Mr. Mayor, just very quickly, what the code says is, if you're going to do that in a regularly scheduled manner, meaning more than 3 times per calendar year, you got to go to the zoning board to try to limit that type of work, that type of worship. You know, similar to a situation where maybe at a midnight mass or something along those lines, and try to treat any.
Excuse me, no shouting out, please. We really can't. We don't have a record. You cannot shout out, please. If you're welcome to speak, one conversation at a time, please. And the question was asked addressing the hours, and we're explaining it to you. Now, if you don't agree, excuse me. You're welcome to speak if you'd like to speak, one at a time. But calling out is not going to be very productive, all right? You asked us about the hours, the village attorney addressed it. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, when you said you only go to something like Sunday school, it doesn't say so here. So when it doesn't say so, that is going to be only, let's say, religious schools, let's say like Sunday school, okay? People can take it as meaning everyday school.
Not actually, because what's going to happen is,
That's what I'm saying, it needs to be specific, it is very broad.
and I'm going to tell you how it's going to be specific. What you're losing maybe track of is this. When applicant A goes before the planning board, they're going to have a pretty specific narrative as to what will be transpiring on that property as a house of worship, whether it be tier 1, 2, or 3. And they are going to be committing in writing, they're going to be committing via their plans that they will be submitting. They will be questioned with regard to the planning board as far as exactly when they say schools, what kind of schools are you talking about? And they will put on the record exactly the type of school that they're talking about.
Mr. Mayor, also, it does say in the references to schools that they are accessory facilities, and each of the different tiers the code provides that a school of general instruction is not considered as an accessory use to the neighborhood place of worship or whatever the place of worship tier that we have, and will be required to meet the standards for an additional principal use. So what that is saying is, if it is not just a CCD class or an after-school class of religious instruction, rather a school of general instruction, it's a school, and that's a different review than one of the uses of assembly or religious worship under this law. So that is in each section of the different tiers under the law.
Going with all of this, when you say religious school, you're not specifying everything, okay? It just says religious school, because you're not specifying what can be taught there. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
Okay,
Because anything can happen there. You need to be more specific.
thank you.
Because if you open this up,
Okay, thank you. Next, Ms. Colgate, name and address for the record, please.